And what did the United States help engineer? That Panama then would get the canal. Or I'm sorry, the U.S. would get a canal. Yeah, revolution in the freedom fighters in Panama. The moral equivalent to our founding fathers. Actually, that's something they would say later on. I was looking at Guatemala in 54. But what country did the United States intervene in and would take over 55% of their finances? With Nicaragua, they do that meantime. But which one specifically 55%? Yeah, the Dominican Republic. So what kind of diplomacy is this? Yeah, big stick. And don't forget that's economic imperialism. So don't forget that's economic imperialism. And so with that, where are we at here? So I showed you, okay, so last thing we have to get is half-dollar diplomacy. And this is basically basic diplomacy. We try to put a happy face on it. They still intervene all over Latin America, but they wanted stability. The whole goal was stability. The threat of intervention, at least, was seen by Taft as being, well, would bring potential revolution, and American business would have more trouble. So they wanted more stability for American business. Stable governments. Meaning, what kind of governments did the United States want in Latin America? Yes. And they would do it through debt. The United States would more actively encourage countries to borrow money from Wall Street banks. Then use any kind of emergency, any kind of problem where a country can't pay back their debt as a way to control them. So you wouldn't need to intervene as much. Just simply say, do you want to get out of debt? Or at least pay back your debt? The United States government will help you if you do what we want. Is that yours? The jungle? Yeah. Okay. It's all gone? Chew up the seeds, but really yummy. Did I make him eat that apple? Yes. Okay, good. All right. Okay. Hey, do you guys know if you're supposed to go to your 5th period class or you have to go to that career fair? What? Does anyone have any idea what this is? Really? I have no idea. Just go there now. Get ready. Everything you need to know, you just have to know. So that's half-dollar diplomacy. Well, in Latin America, there'll be a little bit more. We'll get to Mexico when we get to World War I. But in Asia, remember the United States took the Philippines, and there is imperialism in Asia, and the U.S. wanted the lucrative China trade. You can see by the colors, this is the British Empire with influence over Persia, which is today Iran. France had a big colony, French Indochina, today Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. The Dutch East Indies was a massive colony. Today, what colony? What country is that? Indonesia. Here's the U.S. colony. And Japan was expanding. Russia was expanding into here. All the great powers were looking at China and the way they could exploit their trade. And they were taking ports over. There were 2 wars where the British and the French would beat the Chinese to get treaties to try to exploit China. You probably heard of it. I mentioned once before, the Opium Wars, where they would begin to take over. And they began to basically carve up China. China was an incredibly rich country at the beginning of the 19th century. By the end of the century, they are completely broke. A decrepit empire. In fact, the Taiping Rebellion in the 1860s, over 1 million Chinese would die in the rebellion in this area, which is incomprehensible how many people that is, when you get right down to it. Yeah?
So at this point, then was China's a developed country?
Yeah, which is pretty amazing because 400 years before, they were maybe the most developed country. Right up there, but part of the problem was becoming really strong. You think, why do we need to improve? We're already on top. So they kind of, they abandoned, or they didn't really pursue some of their own scientific achievements like gunpowder. So with that, we're leading to China. Now, the thing in China is, now this is just review. We've already had this in class. Remember how the Chinese immigrants worked in railroads and mines. And then we've also had this law before, the Oriental or Chinese Exclusion Act. Remember, we've had this before. So keeping that element about this very racist time, look at the caricature of Chinese. And that wall is the exclusion fence. Here's another one, the wall. And Chinese are trying to get over with a ladder into the United States. People think wall rhetoric is new today. No, it's always been part of nativism, always. A wall to keep them out. So this is stuff we've already mentioned. But at the same time, US, Britain, France, a growing Japanese power, they were exploiting Japan. And this would lead to one of these climatic events in Chinese history and American history indirectly, the Boxer Rebellion, 1900. And the trigger was, and I'll explain the pictures in just a second, this economic imperialism. All these European powers, and then Japan and the United States, were signing these unequal treaties where they were exploiting the Chinese. A little bit like what the British did to the American colonies. And British or French or American traders did not have to obey Chinese laws. They got these great deals. And they're even talking about splitting it up into colonies, literally carving China up. Manchuria was an independent country right here, and Russia had basically carved it out, and Japan was looking at it. So, but then also missionary activity. There was a wave of Protestant missionaries from most of the United States and Britain. And to many Chinese, they thought the missionaries were treating them as inferiors. There's a lot of resentment. And this would blow up into this rebellion. Now, the rebellion had to be in secret because treaties are laws. So the decrepit empire, the imperial government of China, technically had to enforce these laws. But they secretly supported the uprising. They met in martial arts clubs, amongst many other places. One of them is only in Beijing, but also in Guangzhou, which the British then called Canton. They were called the Society of the Peaceful and Harmonious Fists. And they would begin this uprising against foreign influence. Now, peaceful and harmonious fists, they're martial artists, so they fight. To the British box all the time. So they're boxers. So that's where the term comes from. Martial arts, British saw that, oh, they're beating each other up. It's more complex than that. They're boxers. And they begin this uprising where they would attack Western merchants. They attacked, the Westerners would carve out these walled areas in cities like Shanghai or Guangzhou or Beijing. Then they called it Peking. The Westerners did. They called them foreign legations. They attacked those. They also attacked missionaries, and some they brutally murdered. Terror. Kill them, make them leave. They would even, and this is a picture of it, the relief of it, inside Beijing was where the embassy, all the Western embassies were. And this area would be besieged. And this siege would be called 55 Days in Peking. Peking, that's what the British, and therefore everyone who spoke English called Beijing. It would not be until the late 70s that they would begin to make it a little more phonetic. Beijing, Peking. Canton becoming Guangzhou is the one that always gets me. And blame the British, right? All major problems in the world, who do we want? British, right? So easy, convenient, not to think that. But they didn't want to take the embassy. They didn't want to, even though there would be some fighting, to kill the diplomats. They just wanted them to leave. But all the great powers in the world saw this as, we must enforce our treaties we were exploiting China with. And the great powers organized a military expedition, all working together, that landed and marched on Beijing and liberated the legation. And this shows US and British, but a new, also a great power, the Japanese. But also the Germans, the Austrians sent a few troops. Austria then was a great power, a huge country then. Russia, France, and Germany. And so they all sent troops there. And I love this one. Here's McKinley and Uncle Sam defeating the evil Boxers. And look how they draw the Boxers. Look at the faces, animal-like. Think about how they would try to portray them. But see with the heads on pikes. And you notice the long hair, so implying women. And look at this mother and child. Child wrapped in an American flag, butchered by the Boxers. Sorry about that. Well, he's brutally murdering her right there. Great propaganda. And life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness under treaty rights. I just think that's really funny. Are you waving at people in my hallway? Oh, you're lurking in my hallway. Oh, good. It's Ronald Reagan was born on this day. So wish him a happy birthday. Yes, he died 25 years ago. Okay, so 20 years ago. And I'm really glad I knew somebody on that birthday. I could have made somebody. It's Robert Cleveland's birthday. All right, so now where was I? Should we just jump right into 1980? All right, so Carter was running against Reagan. Okay. This would have great consequence. First off, the Western powers got all their their unequal treaties, but they realized China is too big to colonize. And this would open up, or beginning to accept, what the Americans call the open door. U.S. Secretary of State John Hay suggested this previously. After the Boxer Rebellion, the European powers said it's not a bad idea. All the great powers would equally exploit China, no definite colonies. So they would all take advantage of the unequal treaties, all exploit them for trade. All the great powers would send gunboats and military and small units, usually like the Americans sent a couple gunboats and Marines to enforce these treaties. And they would be there until World War II. And why put World War II there is, in the 1930s, the Japanese decided, we're not going to follow these treaties anymore. We want all of China's trade. And that would be the beginnings of the stepping stones to World War II in the Pacific. But one more big thing about this. Oh, I like this picture. So this is basically where the Boxer Rebellion was. You have all these unequal treaties, but here it is implying that Uncle Sam is like defending the treaty rights for China. And you saw the European powers with their shears ready to cut away colonies, and now Uncle Sam won't let them. Well, they agreed to because of the Boxer Rebellion. Well, let's see if we can guess what countries these are. Anyone? France. That's France. Red, white, and blue. Russia, the big hat. That's Austria. Germany. I always show Germany with the helmet. And Italy really wanted to be a great power. Oh, they so badly wanted to be. They just were too divided. Oh, poor Italy. We'll get a little bit about Italy before World War I. So at the same time, this is going to lead to a huge amount of resentment in China and will forever change China. The Boxer Rebellion is still incredibly important in China. They talk about it all the time. In fact, Boxer Rebellion and the Opium Wars. And this would eventually lead to the end of the empire, a weak Republican Civil War, and eventually the Communist Revolution, and then the basically state crony capitalism of the massive power that is China today. And they still say part of the reason that led to Chinese growth in the way they have molded their empire, or their trading empire, and not allow foreign powers in, goes back to the Boxer Rebellion. So my brother, who's an economist, and he's gone to China many times for various conferences. The They always ask them about the Boxer Rebellion. So what do you know about the Boxer Rebellion? What do you think about the Boxer Rebellion? And they really want to get Americans to say, or other people, I don't know anything about it. How dare you not know about the Boxer Rebellion? That's the most important event in world history. You know, kind of one of those things. And also watch out for secret police, because everywhere you go in China, there's police. One of the economists at the last time my brother was at, he's from Columbia University, and he's an American citizen, but he's a naturalized American citizen immigrant from China. They arrested him for espionage, him and his wife. What's espionage? It's fine. Do they have evidence? They don't care. That's a totalitarian state. That's when my brother texted me in the airport saying, I'm not going back to China. That's kind of scary, isn't it? I kind of want to go to China, but I mean, look at me. I'd be a great spy, right? You all know it, so I'd be arrested just by it. You're laughing at how good of a spy I would be. I made you eat an apple. The whole thing. That's the influence I have over people. So, Japan, while this is going on, let's backtrack this a little bit. Japan before 1853 was in self-imposed isolation. Beginning in the middle of the 16th century, they would not allow any European powers in except for one trading port very limited in Nagasaki. So Japan was still basically medieval in the 19th century, run by their knights, samurais, complex system they had. But in 1853, a small U.S. fleet under Commodore Matthew Perry forced Japan to open up. Commodore just means a temporary command of a fleet. There's Perry right there. The Japanese called them the black ships because they were painted black. These are steamships with cannon, used in a very big fleet, but the Japanese had nothing to match this. The U.S. wanted a station for whaling boats. That was really the main reason. But once that happened, and the Japanese realized what's going on outside of their self-imposed isolation, they realized they had two choices. Become a colony to these people because they have better weapons, or modernize. And that's what we got to get. This would trigger Japan to modernize. And so they look at Perry pretty favorably. Perry, his influence, it wasn't planned, but Perry would force Japan to become a modern industrial power and a great power by the end of the century. One of the fastest economic growths in history. And so in Japan, they have very interesting views of Perry. So I found this picture of Perry. This is a few years after it, so 1956 or 57. Here's from a Japanese textbook, school textbook. It was 20 years ago, but I can't imagine it's changed too much. And look how they draw Perry. Look at the features. Since they want to show him in a favorable light as somebody who made Japan into a great power, they want to show him, well, more like Japanese. Do you remember that picture I showed you a long time ago at Tecumseh? And they had that picture of Tecumseh, not what he looked like, but a picture by the artists of the United States. They kind of showed him with Caucasian features because they feared and respected Tecumseh, so he must be closer to Caucasian. Same deal there. So those racial attitudes and that racial divide, it comes, you know, it's not unique to different areas. That's part of the reason why World War II in the Pacific would be so horrible. In a lot of ways, it was a racial war. If you know much about World War II in the Pacific. In fact, we're going to do that in special topics because we cover just, you know, there's so much. It's unreal how awful it was. So, by then, Japan was expanding. China's being taken up by treaties. Japan had defeated China, and they got Korea back in 1894. Little Japan defeated China. No one expected that. They took, you're going to take part of this island here from Russia later on. And Formosa, which after World War II is going to be called Taiwan. We'll get to it. Taiwan is not a country, technically. Cold War never ends. So we'll get to that. And the conflict here along the Manchurian-Korean border is going to lead to a war that would shock the world, the Russo-Japanese War. I've told you this once before. Look at the countries. Who won? Yep, Japan won. Even if you don't know, just look, whoever comes first lost. This was a bloody, horrible war, showing how awful the new weapons are. It's a colonial war about Manchuria. And what happened was this. When the Japanese realized that Russia is not going to back off of this area here they wanted to control. Russia had just about completed the Trans-Siberian Railroad, a railroad that connected the main European part of Russia all the way to here and into Manchuria. The Japanese realized once they had that railroad, Russia's there to stay. So the Japanese did a surprise attack without warning, without a declaration of war on the Russian Asiatic Naval Squadron at Port Arthur, using the new wonder weapon of the time, torpedoes. I'll tell you a little bit more about torpedoes later. You gotta do that when we get to World War II. They knocked out the Russian fleet without warning. A surprise attack at a Russian naval squadron in harbor. Japanese did it. Nothing to learn from that. There'll be nothing at all to learn, nothing we can glean from that for the future. What am I talking about? Won't Pearl Harbor be pretty close to the same thing? So anyways, there's going to be some horrific fighting, and they discovered how awful the modern war weapons were and how fast they could fire bullets. But the Japanese thought they could just overwhelm Russian defenses, and they charged machine guns and high explosive artillery. Anybody want to guess what happened? Just mounds of Japanese dead. But through Russian incompetence and Japanese luck, they were able to besiege Port Arthur. The Russians, humiliated, decided we got to knock the Japanese out. And they would sail all the way around the world to fight the Battle of Tsushima. And Tsushima is one of these battles I'm just mentioning because it's such a climactic battle. Here's Russian propaganda. And this is the way the Russians looked at it. We, more European, will knock the Japanese out. Asians are inferior and no way they can match up the Europeans. So much of colonization relied on the fact that Europeans seemed to be unbeatable. So people who were not European, they just accepted European superiority and accepted colonization. So much of the linchpin of colonization was that social Darwinistic idea that they must be better. And so they just assumed it. Look at the racial caricature of the Japanese. You look at any World War II propaganda, it's all that in the United States. But they would actually sail their entire fleet all the way around, took nearly a year. And they had to stop all the time for coal. A lot of their ships broke down. They had to repair when they were here in Madagascar. Russia's only ally was France. By the way, anyone know why Russia and France were allies? What's in between them? Germany. Fear of Germany. Enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. Anybody know Japan's only ally? Good guess, but Britain and Russia were in a way fighting over this. It was called the Great Game. They've been fighting over this. Everyone thought that Britain and Russia were going to go to war. It was just an assumption. They talked about it all the time. So Britain, their only ally, was Japan. So when the Russian fleet was here, they thought they might be attacked. So when they saw some Dutch fishing boats right here, they opened fire and sunk 5 Dutch fishing boats. Killed the sailors on board because they thought it was a Japanese attack. Now, I want you to look at the map one more time. Here's Japan. I know that only looks like a few inches, but that's actually a long ways. And by the time they made it all the way to here, they were like rushing to get the Vladivostok right here. The Japanese met them at that strait, and what happened to the Russian fleet? Completely destroyed at the Battle of Tsushima. And here's Japanese ships being ordered to fire an unparalleled victory. The Japanese won one of the most decisive naval victories in history. Knocked out almost all the best Russian ships. I know what you're thinking, but I want to see what happened in the battle. So I found an easy to follow diagram of the battle so you can see exactly what happened. Understand? That will be on the test. By the way, diagrams of naval battles are great. I said, why do you even have this? What does this even mean? They have the time when they fire torpedoes. Decisive battle. And the Russians would be humiliated, forced to finally or surrender, and that would lead to a real change in attitudes, where all of a sudden, maybe Asians can beat Europeans. For that matter, Asians can. What about Africans or anybody else? Here is Japan knocking out Asia. By the way, look how they draw the Japanese face there. It's drawn in an American newspaper, so they make them a little more Caucasian because of, yeah. France in his corner, Britain in his corner. And then, that one is even more just creepy, and Asia for the Asiatics is weird. But it's this idea that Asia can be ruled by people from Asia. There's no natural reason why Europeans, or for that matter, Americans, should be on top. This would begin to chip away, get this down. This would chip away at European or white superiority. It's a big deal. Really big deal. It's one of those, wow. If the Japanese could do that, not only what else could other Asians do, but what else could the Japanese do? I should have one more thing this did. Russia. Devastated. They had a revolution that the Tsar barely put down. But it's the beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution. It's going to come in 12 years. And Russia is going, oh no, we got defeated, humiliated. Maybe our conflict with Britain is stupid. And they drew closer to Britain. And remember, Britain was drawing closer to France because what was Germany building? Say about it. Well, they were becoming a superpower. What were they building? What's that? They already had, Germany already had the greatest army, but remember Albert there, Mahan? A navy. We're talking about the steps to World War I. Well, Roosevelt pulled off a big coup. It's actually pretty amazing when you say about Germany as superpower. If World War II wouldn't have happened, World War I wouldn't have happened, who knows where Germany would. They were growing at a rate that's hard to even comprehend today. But they blow themselves up. So, Roosevelt pulled off a coup. He got the negotiations to end this war in the United States, Portsmouth, Maine. So he could take the credit for bringing the two sides together. And so here's a couple cartoons of it. By the way, that's the Tsar's uncle. Here's like 6'10". The Grand Duke Alexander. Just thought I'd show that off. And the Tsar himself was like 5'4", so it's pretty funny seeing pictures of them together. Just, look like his nephew and looks like a little kid and a monster. But Russians are tall. And here's the thing. Get this down. Japan felt slighted. Japan did not get what they wanted. They felt slighted. Not shown the respect they deserved. And there's nothing more corrosive than somebody who feels slighted. If you feel you're not getting the respect you deserve, then you see everything as another slight. It begins to build and build and build. And there's going to be a whole series of these for Japan over the next 30 years. A slight as they see it. And Roosevelt would be awarded, I did not put this down, but I do want you to get this down. The Nobel, I should have wrote this. Let me rewrite this. That's not. So I don't forget to say it. He was awarded the first Nobel Peace Prize. Offered Nobel, Nobel felt guilty, and he would have an endowment of his vast fortune to have for prizes for science, for literature, but also the big one he wanted for peace. Why was offered Nobel so guilty? What did he invent? Dynamite, high explosives. And he thought high explosives would forever end the threat of war, because humans would not be so crazy to use these weapons against each other because the bloodshed would be so horrific. Little did he know. Human ingenuity. And so that was his guilt. He was a Swede. So with that, Roosevelt would get this, and great propaganda coup, but now what of Japan? Japan is now a threat, and the United States is going to call it the Yellow Peril. The Yellow Peril, the threat of Japanese expansion. And this is showing before World War I, and it's showing the Japanese now empire expanding, and the Americans are here and in the Philippines. This is actually German islands. The Japanese were taking World War I. And war is coming. And the fear of Japanese. In fact, there would even be a limitation. Everybody write down the gentleman's agreement. The United States would have the second restriction on, oh, I like this. Look at that picture of the Yellow Peril. That was actually kind of scary. And the Yellow Terror. That's very racialized, yes. So, the gentleman's agreement was basically this. The Japanese would limit immigrants. San Francisco, where a lot of the Japanese immigrants, when they said they desegregate the schools, they didn't. But the U.S. wanted Japan to limit immigrants. Do you see it? Another slight. Another slight. And this picture, a lot of people think it's from World War II. It's actually before World War I. And so another slide. And when you know that, write down the Great White Fleet. The Great White Fleet. Roosevelt will, as partially to intimidate the Japanese, but also show the United States is strong, send a naval squadron on a worldwide tour, painted white so they look more peaceful. The Great White Fleet. And so here's the Great White Fleet. Here's one of the ships. But this is my favorite picture. What's their power source? Yeah, hard to hide. Hard to sneak up on somebody, isn't it? That's why oil would be such a big deal. And to intimidate the Japanese. And so now the United States is a world power. And here's a very American-centric picture of all these foreign powers coming to the United States for aid or for help. It wasn't like that at the time, but that's coming after World War II. And so imperialism goes on, but at the same time, the progressive era is going on. So the end. And so that's the end of the imperialist movement. And by the way, isn't that awesome? Has anyone ever had that dream or a scare, like where you put your foot down and something grabs you under the back? Wouldn't that be a great way to wake up? That'd get the blood flowing. I always thought about that one, or going up the stairs and somebody reaches through the banister, like in the dark. I was going to think about that tonight. And if you get scared, remember. Monopoly, the progressive era. And that's actually the first monopoly board. It was circular. But the progressives. And the thing about the progressives, you got to get a couple of, and I will write them up because I care about you as people. And you've missed me writing stuff on the board, haven't you? Who's missed it? That's enough for me. All Seth misses. That's all I care about. So, the progressive movement. That's an O. A couple of things about it. Oh, wow, this pin is horrible. Jeez. That should be illegal in some states. I can still smell it. It's like, that's. They took a lot of the ideas of the populists. But this is different. Unlike the populists, they're urban and they're middle class. Remember, middle class is that class between upper and working class. It's not the middle income. It's people who have to work, but they can afford some of the trappings of an upper class life. The vast majority of people to this day, most of the money they make goes towards crazy things like survival. Middle class people have a little bit more money. And these are these new professionals. They're professionals. And it's important to understand, They are benefiting from capitalism. They like capitalism. They're benefiting from the system. They want it to continue. So they're not looking at like the populists who think we got to change the system, and a lot of populists were socialists. Progressives are not socialists. Everyone got that? They're not socialists. They want to save capitalism. Yes.
Were these like the value?
Pre, yeah. This is before them. Baby boom generation would be after World War II. So they always say from 45 to 65. So with that, and they're all retiring. That's why there's going to be a huge shortage of teachers in about like a massive, unprecedented shortage. I'm not saying you want to be a teacher now, but there will be jobs. Wow, will there be jobs? And I'm getting close to retirement. So with that, let's get to the characteristics of it. Number one, they're intensely anti-monopoly. We've talked about anti-monopolies. What are the laws that want to restrict monopolies? They're not called monopolies, it's called antitrust. And remember that antitrust law? The Sherman antitrust law. They want to strengthen this. They want to strengthen it. What they want is they want more competition. To open up the market that will increase or that will drop prices, that will increase quality and innovation, but also raise wages. So they're very anti-monopoly. Number two, they want regulation. They believe only the government can step in and do this. Nobody else is big enough. And capitalism has that inherent trend to help bigger. Remember, economies of scale. So they want a regulation, meaning partially, one of the biggies, to strengthen SAP, to make that stronger. But not just regulations there. They want consumer regulation. And they also want workplace regulation. You know, things like worker safety laws, child labor, workers' comp, social security, which is an old age pension. But also, as more and more people are buying products that are either more complex, so they don't know how they work and have a lot of moving parts, or things like food. Those, when people don't know how they function, it's an easy place to put in shoddy material. And that is why I had you read The Jungle. And that is why we're going to talk about it tomorrow in detail. And talk about mushroom ketchup. By the way, what do mushrooms look like when they're chopped up? Anyone? Anyone? Don't they look like little brown things? What else are little brown things? I want you to just think about that for a second, then enjoy your meal later on. By the way, mushroom ketchup does not sound good to me at all. I don't know. I wish I could help you about the career fair. I don't know where you're supposed to go, and I don't know why. Yes.